Hi everyone. I am so thrilled to join each and every one of you today. I wish that I could be in person with you all there in Michigan, but of course this year had some different plans for us. But I am more than happy to be here virtually with each and every one of you, and I want to just give a quick thank you to the coordinators of this Student Mental Health Summit. Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to be here. For those of you watching right now, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to watch. It's absolutely an honor to be here. So let us get started here. If you have any questions throughout this information that's presented to you, please feel free to jot it down, and I will definitely answer your questions at the end here. So a couple of the objectives for today. The first is really to just take a quick glance at youth and their brain development, because a lot of times as a psychologist, I've gotten the question of why do kids or teens act the way they do? So I'm going to briefly go over just some highlights of brain development for youth, as well as some of the red flags, some of the things to look for, some of the things to consider in the signs and the symptoms of when a teen especially really is needing some mental health treatment. And the third part, the best part, right, are some solutions. Because again, a lot has happened, especially this year. So I want to share with you some solutions that I hope that you bring back to your communities and to your academic environments to really better the lives of youth. So before we get started, I will let you know a little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Nikisha Hammond, psychologist, author, and speaker, and it's really been an honor to have a private practice for the past almost 12 years here in the Tampa Bay area of Florida. And I've deeply enjoyed working. My specialty area is children and teenagers, and I've really deeply enjoyed working in various areas of mental health. Particularly now, my specialty is in ADHD and learning disabilities, and doing psychological evaluations. But especially outside of my office, it's really been a delight to promote positive mental health, and that's been in the media, through speaking and through traveling and speaking to different groups. And it's really been an honor, and I'm very humbled to be able to connect with so many people all over. And again, as I mentioned, I am super thrilled to be here with each and every one of you today. I would love to connect with you. So my information is going to be at the end, but again, if you're on any sort of social media platform, I'm probably on there. So feel free to connect with me. I would love to stay in contact after this, and I wish I could be shaking your hands right now and seeing you all in person, as I mentioned, but perhaps in the future, because again, COVID had other plans this year. But aside from my professional work, I have loved being a part of different community initiatives and different boards. I was the president of the Florida Psychological Association a couple of years ago, which was an amazing experience to really advocate at the state level and federal levels for mental health. And in my spare time, personally, I'm a mom of, I would say, the most amazing 8-year-old little boy on the planet, because he just brings me so much joy, and it's been amazing to be a mom in the midst of everything else happening, and all my professional endeavors as well. I've also been a wife for the past 12 years, and I am a diehard Gator football fan. I apologize if I am offending anyone right now. I actually have a colleague of mine who is a very strong Michigan college Gator fan. So it's really fun just to play around with her on social media when the games will come on. Well, who knows what's going to happen this year, but it's been really a delight. So let's get started here. So the first part is really, again, talking about youth and their brain development. So a lot of people have asked me, why is it that teenagers act the way they do? So why are they so impulsive, and why do they fill in the blank, do something without thinking? And unfortunately, I think sometimes teens get a bad rap. for how they act, or maybe teenagers are in the media and that sort of thing. But really, brain wise, there is something called the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front of your brain. And there's a lot of studies that have shown that area is not as developed for teenagers as adults. Seeing that area is responsible for reasoning and judgment and organization and planning, it would make sense sometimes why for many teens that may be a struggle. Am I saying that this is an excuse for poor behavior? Absolutely not. So for any teens watching this right now, please know that no, because your brain is developed differently, is not an excuse for negative or inappropriate behavior, but just to let you know where the brain development lies. It's one of the areas is a prefrontal cortex that is not as developed. So what happens then because of that is that the amygdala takes over. And the amygdala is the part of the brain that has to do with emotions. So during puberty, the amygdala is developing even further. And a lot of teens are using more of the emotions to respond to threats. As you see here on this graphic, no, I'm pretty sure that Halloween's coming up here. A Halloween jack-o'-lantern is not a threat. But just for the purpose of this demonstration, understanding that when a teen may see a threat, to immediately think in logic and think in reasoning may not be the first response. And it may absolutely be a very emotional response, which can be scary. Even teens that may feel threatened in school by the way a teacher responds, and that teen may decide to talk back, or may decide to throw something down, walk out of the class. All of these things that we're like, why would you do that? It's so emotional for you to behave like that, or it's so irrational. Well, the amygdala is starting to take over. That just emotional response that really starts to happen. So there's really a lot of factors that can affect a person's response to stress, and we're going to get into a lot of those. But first, I really want you to truly understand that for teens especially, their brains are not as developed as adults. And a lot of times, teens have been thought of as little adults. And I'm here to tell you they're absolutely, positively not. They are teenagers. They are going through puberty, experiencing all these different emotions, and with a brain that's still working on being developed, sometimes it can be really difficult. So now that you know some of the physical brain differences that affect you, there are many, many more, but those are really the main two that really affect youth. There's a lot of warning signs as well for why teens are acting the way they're acting, and are they really in trouble? Is this a typical teen behavior, or is this something to really be concerned about? But before we talk about these red flags, I want to really discuss trauma because that's something that's often overlooked. I'm a huge, huge advocate. I just did another presentation this summer, especially centered around, one of the things being centered around trauma-informed education, because it's very, very overlooked. We have a lot of stereotypes about how children and teens behave when really they're going through something traumatic in their life. So there are many aspects of trauma, and for the purpose of this presentation, because there is unfortunately a long list of things that can be traumatic, but for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to talk about COVID-19, which I'm sure still is on everyone's minds. It's been very pervasive. Racial trauma, which has affected people not just in the US, but throughout the globe. And the disruptions and the changes and how school doesn't look the same this school year and may not for a very, very long time. Those are some really critical things that can be really traumatic to children this school year and beyond. So this next image here coming up, I would think this probably summarizes what you think it was like to deal with 2020. And tell me if I'm wrong, but look at this image. Does this feel to you how 2020 has affected you and has affected your school and the students in your life? Because your sense of deflation, of confusion, of frustration, these are all things that so many people are feeling. It is all over the news. It is all over social media. It's a global pandemic that we've really had to deal with. And whether or not it's really recognized, students are absolutely positively feeling this grief, loss, confusion, frustration as well. The thing about COVID is that parents have lost jobs. Incomes have been affected. There are some children right now and teens that are struggling because they have had to move out of the place that they call home. I mean, it's really sad, just the evictions and the things that have been happening, all because of a global pandemic, essentially. And on top of all these things, still trying to be a teenager and having a personal life of some sort, which has also been very disrupted this year. So I want to remind you of these things because moving into, when we get into the part about, the red flags and the different parts of mental health, we must understand how much this has really affected. Again, this is not, COVID-19 is not something that's going to affect teens for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. For some teens, this will be years that they will be dealing with the different effects that have happened to them in their lives and in their families' lives and in their schools. So it's very serious for us to understand how impactful this can be. I had a student that was in my waiting room, and it was really sad. He was about 10 years old, and I was going out to get him for some psychological testing. And when I got to the waiting room, he was in tears and he was crying. And this is over the summer. And I said, well, I thought, because some kids are just really anxious to have a psychological test. And so I said to his mom, I'm like, is he okay? Like, is he nervous about the testing? And she was like, no, he just started breaking down because he was so sad that he can't be interacting as much as he wants to with his friends, because they started talking about the virus and the need to wear masks and, going out in public and those sort of things. And it was horrible, right? So just really in every facet, children are really affected and teens are really affected by this. The other part of this year in particular is really the racial trauma that has happened for numerous youth. So seeing images and seeing videos of senseless killings, of conflict, of people hurting one another emotionally, physically, it takes a toll. And for teens who love to be on social media, much of the time, it doesn't matter if you don't watch the news as a teenager. You don't have to sit down and watch the evening news like most teens are not doing, but you have a phone or you have a tablet or a computer or some way that you are on the internet witnessing all of these things. And this absolutely has affected our youth. There's many youth that have actually gotten involved and they've been on the front lines. They've been at the protests. There's many teens that have chosen to do that. There's also many teens that have really, really struggled with depression and anxiety as a result of all of the images and all the things that they are seeing. There are youth right now that are being bullied for the way that they look. A lot of the research on bullying in particular of teens and their identity, things that you cannot change. So if a teen gets made fun of for the shoes that they're wearing, you know what? They can choose the next day to go to school and not wear those pair of shoes. They can choose that, right? You can choose that, maybe. But if a teen gets made fun of because of the way they look and because their skin color is darker, when you show up to school the next day, you still look the same. You still have the same color skin. And a lot of the research has shown with bullying, specifically with about your identity, that those kids struggle the most because it's not something that can be changed. It's something you clearly see, like skin color or physical features or something else that cannot be changed. Not your hair color. You can color your hair, but physical features or skin color or something else that cannot be changed about you. That's where children and teens really struggle with the most. So I would highly, highly encourage you. There's a lot of amazing resources right now, particularly with racial trauma. And I could talk for another couple of hours really about racial trauma because there's so much to know. But for the purpose of this talk, I really want to encourage you to continue your investment in youth by understanding racial trauma and understanding how it affects many, many youth. If you do need additional resources related to this, again, please feel free to reach out to me, email, send me a direct message on social media or whatever it is you need to do. I would be more than happy to get you resources specifically related to this. I've done a lot of media work specifically related to racism, racial trauma, and how this all affects youth because it's heavy and it's a lot, especially when you're trying to function and just be a teenager and go to school. So instead, if you see a child walking around and looking sad, please understand there's so much racial trauma. There's COVID-19. We're going to get into some more things related to school and the changes and the disruptions and the challenges. There's so much that teens have had to undertake at young age, teens at young ages. When you used to be worrying about, your friends and all the child and teen things you need to be worrying about. But instead we're worrying about something far greater. So please understand that they may be experiencing racial trauma, particularly for students who identify as BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color. There are absolutely additional stressors for youth who identify as BIPOC. There are additional stressors right now. Again, as I mentioned, see the trauma of seeing images of people that are killed that look like you, of everything that's happening in the media, things that are happening on social media. It takes a toll. It really, really does. So we have to make sure that we are checking in with our youth and really making sure that they're okay. And we're going to get into that in the solutions section. And the last part to really remember before we get into some of the red flags are all of the school changes that have happened in the past year. This is new. This isn't something that happened a decade ago. This is all new. So for many students, some students I have met love virtual school. They're like, I want to go to virtual school for the rest of my life. Other students are struggling and having a really difficult time in a virtual school setting. They are not doing well. There are students with special education needs who are struggling, who are not getting the support that they have gotten because of a virtual environment, and as a whole, as a society, we're playing catch up. And what's happening right now is the achievement gap is actually widening, unfortunately, because there's so many different variables when it comes to special education needs, when it comes to what's happening in that household. Again, what's happening with these children and these teens? Is a parent unemployed? Is a parent able to provide? Is a parent able to afford all these masks and things that we need and all these extra things now that we need in society? What is happening in the household, and how does this affect youth? I think about how critical it is right now for us to have as much empathy and patience as possible. I know what you're thinking also, because there's so much that even as adults, whether you're in education, mental health, or whatever area, working with others, we have to take care of ourselves also, but also still be there for the youth that we're serving. So I really urge you to have as much as you can patience and empathy and understanding how difficult this has been, especially for children who already have depression and anxiety and a mental health issue. This is that much harder. The isolation that has happened, the graduations that did not happen last year, or maybe they were virtual. There's so many changes that have happened. Everything looks different. And for some teams, they're thriving, they're doing amazing, and they're resilient. And for others, they're struggling. And it is hard to make all these changes and hard to understand the unknown. So now let's get into some of the red flags for youth. There are many, many red flags. I pulled out some for you to really think about. And these are really, really important because the research has shown the earlier the intervention, the better. The earlier the intervention, the better. And I know we're talking about teens right now. Ideally, in my mind, as a psychologist, I would love for all kids at the preschool level and early elementary school levels to be getting the help they need, which does sometimes happen and sometimes not. So even if we're talking about a teen that's 16, 17 years old, it's still better to get the help that they need in their teen years than to wait 10, 20, 30 years later. I promise you, it's better for outcomes. It's better to have a productive life to get the help that they need in their child and teen years. So some of the red flags to be on the lookout for. One is a change in behavior. That is really, really important. So if you saw a child last school year in particular, and more or less they were doing well in school, maybe they're making average grades, they're doing great, and this school year is completely different, like night and day. First understand, so that's why we talked about all the things related to trauma. First understand this year is going to be quite unusual with behavior, with teens, because of COVID in particular, because of the racial trauma, because of how different this year has been. But that is really, really critical to look at how are teens changing in their behavior. Are they becoming more aggressive physically or verbally? Are they now missing school, and why? Are they now talking about self-harm, which is critical, and I can't stress enough, a huge red flag, and something to really, really further look into and clarify. There's some teens that talk about self-harm and they will never try to kill themselves. There's some teens that talk about self-harm and they are thinking about suicide. In either boat, it is critical to get interventions, to get mental health interventions, preventative, when you hear those types of things happening. The other thing is loss of appetite or problem sleeping. Are you hearing from families at home that they're struggling, that they're refusing to eat, or they're eating too much, or they're falling asleep in class, or those sort of things that are, again, outside of the norm of their typical behavior? These are red flags that something is wrong. A drop in grades is another thing. Is this an A-B student? Maybe C's, now they're getting D's and F's. Huge red flags. Because how are you functioning? How are you performing? The biggest thing that I want you to keep in mind with youth is when you see a change and they're functioning, when you see a massive change socially, emotionally, academically, those sort of things are the red flags that need to be addressed. And some teens will look angry or they'll look sad, and some not so much. Because some teens really just internalize information and they do not necessarily display it. They may not be physically aggressive at all, but instead withdrawing from others. So is that what's happening? And overall, just using really, really poor judgment. So these are some of the red flags that really we have to pay attention to, especially in the school system where many teens are spending a lot of their time, whether it's virtual or in person. This is really, really critical. And there are ways to do some prevention efforts and intervention to help these youth. So the good news is there absolutely is, there are many, many different ways to intervene in the lives of youth. And we're going to get into my favorite part of this presentation, which are some solutions. Because again, so much has happened this year. And one of the biggest questions I get working with the media is, how do we help? I think that's like the number one question. Like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Right? Especially this year, especially with COVID, especially with protests, especially with racial trauma. Like, what do we do? Right? And there's a couple of things that I really want to suggest for your community, and really think long and hard about how to implement these things, because it is so critical. It is so critical to put prevention efforts and intervention efforts into place if we're going to save kids. And I hope that's why you're here today and you're watching this, to really make a difference and to really save kids. So the first one is really about the role of students. And oftentimes, particularly in the school system, I used to work in the school system many moons ago, way back when I was in graduate school, which was a while back. But I used to work in the school system part-time as a substitute teacher. And it was very interesting because back then it was very students and teachers and staff, and everything was very separated. There was like not a lot of harmony, not a lot of teamwork back then. And depending on where you're located, depending on your school and how your school is made up, you may already have some of these things in place. But if you don't, I hope that you are open to really having students, especially teenagers, having them involved in the solutions. That is so important. Because, for example, peer counseling. I could send you tons of research, if you would like, about peers and how powerful they are in regards to helping one another. They listen to one another. They do. They value one another. So training peers, training teens of how to help other teens. Now, there's obviously boundaries. So we're not talking about teens that need help related to self-harm, let's say. That would not be a good candidate. But there are teens right now that are struggling. How do I cope with COVID-19? How do I deal with now my parents are getting divorced? How do I deal with someone that I know that has COVID-19 and they're in the hospital? How do I deal with school? It's hard. I'm anxious about taking tests. Those sorts of aspects where they can talk to other peers. Sometimes it's even supportive groups, maybe not necessarily therapeutic, but more educational type of groups that they're in, or again, peer counseling. And a lot of schools have really benefited from that type of measure. And again, obviously there's different parts. If there's abuse and things like that, that they would definitely need to go to a mental health professional. But of the more milder things that can happen to teens, absolutely they can be a part of something to really collaborate and really get the help that they need and feel supported by their peers. Another thing is wellness programs. So I've seen, I'm sure you have too, many teens that are on TikTok, that are on Instagram. I get so overjoyed when I see it, by the way. And they are promoting wellness and positive mental health. It is so cool. I get so excited. I get excited for anything related to teens and kids. But I get so excited to see that and reaching thousands of people with this information. So imagine having wellness programs, okay? Maybe you may or may not, depending on what school you're at, call it mental health. There's such a stigma, unfortunately, with mental health. That people can hear, teens can hear the words, the term wellness. People like that. So let's call it wellness because it is, and it's prevention efforts. And maybe it's a social media campaign, and maybe it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever other social media means at your school that you want teens to be a part of. But it has to be something exciting, and it also has to be something that teens lead. So what is their contribution? Are teens having an opportunity to really contribute? To not say, hey, all the adults have decided you're going to do TikTok videos. No, instead, to have a conversation, multiple conversations with teens and ask teens, hey, we're thinking about this, but what is your contribution to this? Because I guarantee you, some really great, amazing teens have some awesome ideas. So thinking about that. Also school culture in general. When I have seen, when I was in the school system, so I spent a couple years throughout graduate school as a substitute teacher, and also when I was doing my residency, I did that in the schools as well, in Hillsborough County here in Tampa Bay area for 2 years. And I will tell you, I've been to so many different schools, and schools are like night and day. I would go to school on one side of town, maybe it was an A-rated school, and then I would go to a school on another side of town that maybe was rated or graded as an F school, and the curriculum, the school culture, the resources, everything, it was night and day. Mental health support, night and day. So really I strongly suggest to you that, again, these teens, these students are part of your school culture, this positive school culture that you're creating, because many of the teens I work with, they will let me know. So this school is this type of school, and this school is that type of school, and this school is known for this. They know. They know what each school is known for. So again, think about what is your school known for, and how can teens be a part of changing the culture of that school for the better. Dialogue. Oh my goodness. I wish I had like 3 more hours. I'm not going to talk to you for 3 more hours about dialogue, but having conversations in the classroom, so important, or if it's virtually or in the classroom, about these things that are happening in the world. It's one thing to learn from a textbook. I'm not trying to take away from that. I know what you're probably thinking too. We only have so much time in our curriculum to teach, but taking a small amount of time to really process in the classroom, student-led sometimes, of what is happening to you with COVID-19, and what has happened with racial trauma and all these things that are starting to happen. You might have missed a graduation. Maybe your birthday was postponed till next year because of COVID-19 and these celebrations and weddings and funerals and all sorts of things that are not the same. So what does that look like for students? How are they coping with it? Are we having these dialogues in the classroom or virtually with students, because it is so needed, and allowing them to have an outlet? And again, maybe it's not an hour-long conversation, maybe it's shorter, but it absolutely positively needs to be happening, because teens need to process, and it changes the classroom environment so much to be more supportive and more collaborative. How can you help one another? Oh, now you know that this person, just lost someone to COVID. That's huge, right? And now their peer can support them or understand, oh, that's why you were out of school, because you were dealing with grief, for example. So there's a lot of things that need to be discussed, and we need to have continued dialogue with teens about anti-racism, about racial trauma, about COVID-19, about all the things that you've missed out on this year. What does that mean for you? We need to have these conversations. And the last thing is student-teacher relationships. I have had the honor in my career of meeting literally thousands of people at this point. It's been really cool to be a psychologist and just traveling and meeting people from all different walks of life, many people. And I have heard so many stories from parents. My favorite stories are the stories of teachers that have gone above and beyond for their students. Let me tell you how impactful it is. When I hear from parents that this particular teacher in their life has gone above and beyond, has known what a family is going through. And I know what you're probably thinking. There's a lot of kids. There are a lot of kids, most oftentimes virtually or in person. But when you look at the warning signs, I'm not asking any teachers to be mental health counselors here, but when you look at the warning signs and when you take the time to really show students that you care, they absolutely know and they feel it. When you take the time to make the extra step, parents know, families know, because again, hearing those stories it's just been really cool to see that and the impact on families. So I just urge there to be an environment where student-teacher relationships are really celebrated, to make sure that we are supportive as much as possible, especially right now when teens need more support now more than ever. And the other thing is community partnerships. So whether it's a place of worship, whether it's mental health facilities or physical health facilities, nonprofit organizations, mentoring, there's so many different community initiatives and many people and organizations would love to get in contact with schools. I know that one of the boards that I serve on, the Ryan Neese Foundation, we partner with different community agencies, and we have a program, the student service program. We work with 11th and 12th graders and teach them about leadership and about giving back and about kindness and all sorts of amazing things. And really, it's been so amazing to see the difference in their lives and in these teens and now adults, because I still see what they're doing on social media, just doing amazing things. And so I urge you to get in contact with local nonprofits and with mentorship organizations. One of my favorite organizations for mentorship is Big Brothers Big Sisters, because they do amazing things and kids desperately need mentorship. So again, I know I'm saying a lot here with this talk and a lot of suggestions, but I want you to remember that as schools and as communities, it's not just one thing that's going to save kids. It is a partnership with mental health facilities and with communities and with nonprofits, and again, if it's a place of worship, let's say, or whoever other organizations can be a part of making your school better and helping youth. That is going to be critical. And as I wrap up here, I want to remind you of another solution that's already a solution, but this is your reminder about modifications for learning. So there are so many students, particularly with COVID-19, everything that it's brought, that have struggled so much. I've heard so many stories about kids with ADHD, about kids with depression, about kids with anxiety, and kids with trauma, and there's so many things that need to be put into place. So again, if you're in person right now and you're in a separate, if they need a separate room or extended time or extra breaks or whatever accommodations that they need, especially during this time, I'm really hopeful that as a community and as a academic entity here, that we will be supportive of our students. If the student happens to be in a virtual environment, to also think about creative ways to implement these types of things in a virtual environment as well, because teens absolutely positively need these modifications. I have seen, as a person who has done many psychological evaluations, I have seen the tremendous difference when children get the modifications that they need in the curriculum, in their school day. It makes a huge difference. So I just urge you to remember that. And one of the last things I'll talk about, which is so, it's so important. It's a gift if we give this to teens early. And that is self-care. So are you promoting self-care for teens? Because these are just some examples here. And this year especially, teens learning to take care of themselves, whether it's through exercise, reading, drawing, cuddling with their pet. There's so many on this list, and these are some examples. There's many more, of course. But are we really teaching youth how to take care of themselves too, particularly with teens? Because in a couple years, we're off into the quote-unquote real world to be adults. So are they prepared? It's one thing academically, and I've said this to, I think numerous academic environments that I've spoken in, but it's one thing for children to be academically well, if you will, and making good grades and learning about their subjects. But it's another thing for them to be emotionally well. And it is critical that they are learning how to take care of themselves and how to self-soothe and how to deal with the depression or anxiety or trauma that they're going through. How do you deal with that? Well, at some point they become adults, right? It's easier sometimes if you have a supportive family or a supportive academic environment, but at some point you become an adult and you have to learn how to deal with these things. So teaching teens about self-care is so critical. So again, these are just some of the examples. Taking a break, taking a mental health day, so important. I know it's a little controversial. Some schools will say absolutely not. We're not, advocating for that, and some schools are on board with that. But that is something for you to think about as well. There's a lot of children that can benefit from that. A lot of teens that can benefit from that. So if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to connect with me anytime. Here's all my information here. Again, if it's email, you can send me a direct message on social media if you'd like. I have a Facebook Live digital show that I do every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at Black Women Empowered Incorporated Facebook page. There's almost 2 million followers on there right now. It's open to anyone. It is called Black Women in Power, but it's open to every race, every gender, every religion. Everyone is welcome. So feel free if you want to join BWE Mental Health Moment. I'll be on there again every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or connect with me on social media. But I just want to say it's been an absolute delight to be with each and every one of you. Again, I wish it was in person. But again, I'm honored that you took the time to learn this information to help youth. So I wish you well in everything that you were doing, especially this school year. And again, any questions whatsoever, let me know.